Hi friends, it's Lisa Hetrick, illustrator for Gina K Designs, and I'm so grateful you could join me today. We are going to have some super duper watercolor marker mojo fun in today's tutorial. I have this card here that was created with my new stamp set called Just a Little with Gina K Designs. And today I'm recreating it and we're going to have some fun with markers. And I'm going to talk a little bit about all the different kind of marker mediums that you could give a go with creating some watercolor effects. And I'm going to be recreating this card with a little bit of a twist. Going to be using this large stamp from the Just a Little stamp set, and we're going to heat emboss it with some black embossing powder from Gina K Designs, because that is going to hold in the marker as a watercolor medium. So I'll get into that a little bit more. And I'm also doing a little bit of a twist here because we're going to be using some Bristol paper. So I'm showing this Fabriano Bristol paper. It's made in Italy. It's really, really nice paper. It's smooth. It's readily available. There's also this brand from Strathmore. Either Bristol paper is fantastic, but the reason why I'm using Bristol paper for this watercolor project is because the watercolor markers work better on this smooth Bristol paper. When you're using watercolor paper, it tends to embed, the color tends to embed in the texture of the paper, so it gets a little crunchy and it's a little more difficult to work with. So when you're using these Bristol papers, it's a lot smoother effects. So I'm going to go ahead and just ink up the large floral stamp with some Versamark and get it nice and juicy, because the smooth paper for Bristol is going to kind of move a little bit. Because it's so smooth, you have to be really careful when you're stamping, because your stamp can kind of glide with that Versamark. So I'm getting a really nice layer of Versamark on here so that I can go ahead and ink it up and get it nice and juicy, and then put it into the black embossing powder. So I'm just kind of positioning this in the upper right hand corner, because I'm going to move the whole piece of paper around. I'm not sure which configuration I'm going to do, if I'm going to do horizontal or vertical yet, but you can see a little bit of residual color from this stamp that I had left on there, but that's okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and dip it in here to the black onyx embossing powder. Get that all over the place. And yes, I didn't use the embossing static pad. I kind of forgot to do that. I always forget to do that, but that's okay. I'm just going to go ahead and tidy it up a little bit. And I took it off camera and went ahead and heat embossed it. So you can see that this black embossing powder is amazing, because it is so rich in color, and there is a really nice shine. Okay, so here are the markers that I'm going to be using for the project. So I have a handful of markers here, really bright, sort of neon-like colors. So I've got, and I also have some paint pens and the Uniball white Signo pen. So I have 2 white pens to use at the end for detail. And I have some Arteza and Zig clean color brushes. These are great watercolor brushes. They're great mediums. They're really bright colors. Here's some of the bright colors that I'm using. So I'm going to be using a combination of these 2 brands together. And I really love the hot pinks. I also have a couple Tombos here, because I really like using Tombos as well. And these 3 colors are going to be great, a great combination. And I have this mini water brush from Pentel. I am super digging this new mini water brush that they've come out with. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on the coloring. And you can see that I'm using the pink from the Zig Clean Color brush. And I'm just adding a little bit of that color into some of the petals and the succulents. And then using the water brush, not really using a lot of water, just letting the water come out of the water brush by itself, and pulling that color out to the edge of the leaf within the succulent. So you can get that nice variegation of light to dark. But the Bristol paper does a really nice job of holding the color and also holding the water. So normally I would say you need to use uh, watercolor paper when you're using a lot of water, but we're really only using a little bit here. So the smooth surface is really, really nice for this effect. And the fact that you can add a little bit of color into the inner part of the flower and kind of pull that color out to the outer edge, the embossing powder is really holding in all of that color. So you can also see here that instead of doing direct to paper by taking the marker and putting it right on the paper, I also take the marker and put a little bit of that color down on my mat and use that as a watercolor medium to just color with. So just by lifting it up with the water brush and kind of going back and forth, I'm able to vary the gradation of color that I'm using. So I'm just working through the different clean color brush and the Arteza brand of the watercolor markers and just adding a little bit of color. And you can see I'm doing a little color mixing here by taking the pink and taking the blue to just kind of create a little bit of a purple tone to work into that feather. I really, really like the markers for that reason because they're so versatile. So you could mix the Zig markers, you can mix the Arteza colors just by scratching a little bit of that color down onto your mat, adding a little bit of water. You're going to be able to get different tones of color and different mixes of color by using the markers that you have. So I'm right here, I'm just going ahead and adding a little bit of blue. I've watered that down a little bit. You can see that I'm mixing it a little bit with the purple, mixing the blue and the purple together in the area of the stamp where I already have that stipple effect going. So it adds a little bit more dimension and texture. And there isn't a lot of water going here. I'm just kind of blending it all out to the edge and not squeezing the water brush. So it isn't like super, super watery, but you can see that we're getting really, really nice watercolor effects from this technique. Okay, so it really didn't take a long time to dry. There really wasn't a lot of wait time here, but I just went in with a darker pink marker and I'm adding a little bit of a darker tone into the inside of the petals on the succulent, just to add a little bit more depth to the center of the flower, because the flowers tend to always be a little darker in the center and a little lighter on the outer edge. And really, we're not going for realism here. We're just really going for some beautiful, fun coloring effects and just getting a little bit of graduation of color. So by working from light to dark, you're going to be able to add different dimensions and layers in your coloring. So right now I'm just adding a little bit more details and just kind of blending out some of those darker colors, just pulling them out to the edge just to kind of get a little more variation of color. And I'm really digging the way this is looking. It's really kind of pop arty. The colors that I selected are really super bright. So it kind of makes a nice contrast on this really, really, really white Bristol paper. So now I'm going to go in and add a little bit of the Tombow color, and I'm going to focus on this pink and this orange. So I'm going to add a little bit of the orange to some of the petals because it's going to layer on top of the bristles. So you can see I've added a little bit to the center, and I'm going to add a little bit to the bottom portion of the floor, the leaves, and a little bit in the flowers because it adds just another level of color and another level of shadow, sort of. But whenever you take, on the Bristol paper, it dries really super quick. So whenever you take one of the Tombow colors and you're adding it on top, it really does add just an extra little bit of brightness. And you could do this with anything. It doesn't have to be Tombow. So I'm going to go ahead and adhere this card base using my ATG gun. It's a little bit warped, so I really, really wanted it to stick onto the card base. So I really wanted to use some super duper glue. And the ATG gun really works. So I'm going to go ahead and add this on to the card base before we add the sentiment to it. Just getting it on there nice and good, and it looks so good. I'm just digging this color. So right there, before we get started, I'm going to take some of the Uniball Signo and the Posca pen and just add a little bit of detail dots into the succulent with this white pen. What it does is it kind of mimics the look and feel of the splatter that's already a part of the stamp. It also adds a little bit of extra detail and fun to the project, and it brings a little bit of that white paper color over into all of those really, really bright pop arty light colors. And it's just super easy to do. You just whip out your white paint pen or your white gel pen and just add a few little dots, and it just adds another element of texture and dimension to the project. And I'm going to go ahead and color in the center of the flower because that'll add some really nice pop to the project. So now it's time to go ahead and add a sentiment, and I'm going to just use the Thinking of You sentiment from the set and nest it right there in between those two leaves. So I'm using the amalgam ink because it is a really, really nice, rich black ink. And I'm going to go ahead and stamp that Thinking of You down on a piece of scratch paper first. And here's why. Because I tend to booger it up right out of the gate. So I like to go ahead and take my sentiment, ink it up, and stamp it down on a piece of scratch paper so I can make sure everything's clean and there's nothing, no stray debris or anything on my stamp set. So I went ahead and took the amalgam ink and just kind of inked it up again and just kind of free range positioned it. You could use your Misty if you really wanted to line things up really well, but I'm just lining it up between those two lines, those two leaves, and just getting it in position. It looks really nice here. It's nice and straight. The sentiments in the set are I used a really, really super clean font when I created them, so you get a really, really nice impression with your sentiment. And look at this detail in the succulent and that color pop. So adding that white detail really just kind of made those colors pop even more. So I'm really, really loving the way this whole card is looking. And I really love getting out all my markers and getting my marker mojo on and mix and mashing them together. So that's the really cool thing. You can take all of the different kinds of markers you have, different brands, and match them up together and use those colors interchangeably. I love the versatility of that. So here's another look at the card, the final card. I took it outside and took a nice picture with my begonias because I really love my begonias right now. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.